Frost feathers the inside of the cottage wall, just beside the children's straw bed. Above them, smoke hangs in the rafters because the fire is weak and the roof has no chimney. A cow shifts in the dark at the far end of the room. Somewhere under the blankets, someone coughs. It is January. The road is buried. There is no forecast, no electric light, no doctor coming quickly through the snow, no shop with fresh bread waiting in the next village. By the hearth, a mother lifts the lid of the grain chest. Not much left. A little rye, a strip of salted meat, maybe beans if the mice have not found them. Winter is not one disaster. It is a slow countdown, meal by meal, log by log, until the first green shoots return. And when the last stored grain was measured against the last weeks of winter, what actually decided whether a peasant family reached spring alive. But the surprising truth is that most winter survival was decided long before the first snow fell. That is the lens of this story. Not kings and castles, not knights crossing frozen fields. Ordinary rural households in northern and western Europe, where winter could last for months and darkness arrived before the day's work was done. By the end, you will understand the system that kept them alive. Stored calories, managed heat, layered clothing, animals under the same roof, church calendars, neighbors who could mean survival or ruin. Because medieval peasants did not survive winter by being tougher than us. That is the wrong picture. They survived by preparing early, eating carefully, burning fuel slowly, sharing labor, and knowing when to stop. In winter, movement cost energy. Waste was dangerous. Pride could kill. A peasant family had to think in seasons, not days. The loaf on the table in November had to answer for February. The firewood stacked by the wall had to answer for March. The pig slaughtered at the right time could stretch fat, meat, and broth across the hungry months. Winter survival was not conquering nature. It was surrendering to its calendar. And the first rule of that system was brutally simple. If the harvest failed, the house was already in trouble. The harvest did not become winter food by accident. Once the grain was cut, threshed, winnowed, and carried under cover, it became the center of the household's survival. Wheat, rye, barley, oats, whatever the family had grown, owed, kept, or received as payment, now had to be protected from damp, rats, mold, and theft. Grain mattered because it could become many meals. Ground into flour, it became bread. Cracked and boiled, it became porridge. Simmered with water, herbs, scraps, peas, or beans, it thickened pottage. Whole wheat could be boiled into soft, heavy dishes like frumenty, sometimes enriched with milk if the household had it. This was not variety for pleasure. It was variety for survival. The same stored crop could be eaten thin or thick, baked or boiled, stretched with vegetables, or turned into low-alcohol ale. Ale was not just a drink. In many households, it was safer and more useful than plain water, and it carried calories from grain in another form. Around that grain, the rest of the winter storehouse took shape. Peas and beans were dried until they could sit for months. Root vegetables were buried, clamped, or kept in cool, dark places. Cabbages, leeks, onions, and other hardy greens helped flavor the pot when they were available. Meat from autumn slaughter could be salted or smoked, especially pork. Fish might be dried, salted, or smoked where rivers, coasts, markets, or lordly rights made it possible. Milk could not simply be saved, so it was changed. Cheese held the value of summer pasture in a solid form. Butter could be salted. Fat from slaughtered animals became cooking fuel for the body, just as wood fed the hearth. The logic was simple. Calories mattered more than freshness. Carbohydrates mattered because cold bodies and working bodies burn fuel fast. A medieval peasant did not look at a sack of rye and see only food. They saw time, weeks of bread, days of pottage, a measure for each mouth. But storing food was only half the problem. Every meal also had to be small enough to leave tomorrow alive, so the winter meal became a calculation. A household might begin the cold months with pottage thick enough to stand a spoon in, grain boiled with peas, beans softened in the pot, onions, leeks, cabbage, herbs, anything that gave bulk or taste. Early on, a family could still pretend the store was strong, but the pot told the truth. As the weeks passed, the same meal could grow thinner, less flour, fewer peas, more water, a heel of bread saved for the oldest man, a ladle held back for a child, a second helping refused because February was still waiting. This was not simply poverty, it was arithmetic. Every sack had already been reduced before it reached the household. The Lord might take rent. The church took tithes. Seed grain had to be kept back for spring. A bad harvest could leave the bins low from the start. Damp could spoil what was stored. Rats could chew through a corner. A thief could take in one night what a family needed for a week. So peasants did not ask, "What do we want to eat?" They asked, "How long must this last?" That question became sharper as winter aged. The body needed more fuel in the cold, especially for people still hauling wood, tending animals, repairing fences, grinding grain, and walking through mud or snow. Yet the storehouse was moving in the opposite direction. Less food, more need. And the cruelest stretch came before spring truly arrived. Fields might be green, but not ready. Animals might be alive, but not yet fattened on fresh pasture. New crops had not been harvested. Milk was limited until the season turned. The landscape could look like it was waking up while the household was still hungry. That is why survival depended less on one great feast than on hundreds of small refusals. A thinner bowl, a smaller loaf, a handful of beans saved. Medieval winter was measured one meal at a time, and even if the food held out, there was another resource that could vanish just as dangerously: heat. Heat began long before the first frost. For a peasant household, fire was not something you simply made in winter. It was something you prepared for months. Wood had to be cut, stacked, and dried. Brushwood had to be gathered from hedges and woodland edges. In some regions, peat or turf was sliced from wet ground, lifted, and left to harden in the air. Coppice branches were taken from managed trees, bundled, and carried home. This was labor, heavy, repetitive, seasonal labor. And it mattered because fuel had quality. Dry hardwood burned longer and hotter. Small sticks caught quickly but vanished quickly. Damp wood hissed, spat, and filled the room with smoke. Heat could smolder for a long time, but if it was not properly dried, it gave more choking smoke than useful heat. Bad fuel did not just make an unpleasant fire, it changed the whole household. A smoky hearth stung the eyes and blackened the rafters. A weak fire left pottage half-cooked and bread poorly baked. Too little fuel meant the family might choose between warming bodies and boiling food. In deep cold, that choice could push already hungry people toward illness. Most peasant houses did not have a fireplace in every room. Many did not have every room. Heat came from one central hearth, set on the floor, or a raised patch of clay or stone. Smoke rose into the rafters and escaped through thatch, a smoke hole, or gaps in the roof. Chimneys existed, but in poorer dwellings they were limited, late, or absent. So warmth leaked away. Walls helped a little. Thatch helped a little. Bodies helped more. The fire was not a modern heater filling a sealed house. It was a working flame used when it had a job. Cooking, drying, light, shared warmth. That is why fuel was guarded like food. A stack of wood was a winter storehouse. Burn too much in December, and February punished you. Burn too little, and the cold entered your hands, your feet, your lungs. Medieval survival was calculation by flame, and sometimes the warmest thing in the house was not the fire at all, but the animals breathing beside it. A cow in winter was not just a cow. It was milk if she could be fed. It was manure for the fields. It was muscle for hauling, plowing, and pulling a cart through mud. A pig was not just meat. A hen was not just eggs. A sheep was wool, milk, hide, dung, and, if hunger demanded it, a carcass. Animals were living savings accounts, but savings could eat. By late autumn, a household had to look at its fodder and make a brutal decision. Hay, oats, straw, bean stalks, leaves cut from trees, anything that could be fed to an animal had to last until grass returned. Snow could cover pasture for weeks. Frozen ground gave little. A hungry beast lost strength fast, and a dead beast gave no spring labor. So many families slaughtered animals before winter closed in. Pigs were the obvious choice. They fattened well in autumn, especially where they could feed on acorns and beech mast in woodland. Once killed, the meat could be salted, smoked, or packed away as lard and bacon. That turned a breathing mouth into stored calories. Useful, necessary, but dangerous if carried too far. Keep too many animals, and the fodder runs out before Lent. The family watches its wealth starve in the byre. Kill too many, and spring arrives with another problem. No ox to pull the plow, no cow for milk, no breeding stock to rebuild the herd. Winter forced peasants to choose between surviving the next month and protecting the next year. The animals also changed the house itself. In many poorer rural homes, homes, people and livestock lived close together, sometimes under the same roof, with a byre at one end or a shared wall between them. That meant warmth. A cow, a goat, or a few sheep gave off body heat all night. It also meant stink, damp straw, flies, fleas, lice, dung, and disease. Survival was not clean, it was crowded. It breathed beside you. The same animals that fed a family could drain its stores, foul its air, and decide whether the fields could be worked when the thaw came. Medieval winter survival was calculation with a heartbeat, but bodies still had to endure hours of darkness and cold, and that meant survival could come down to what touched the skin. What touched the skin mattered more than the fire across the room. A medieval peasant house did not become warm in the modern sense. The hearth gave heat, but smoke escaped through a hole, a louver, or the thatch itself. Walls leaked, doors gaped, floors were often packed earth. You did not heat the house. You trapped the heat your body made. That started with wool. Wool was winter technology. A tunic, a cloak, a hood, hose, mittens, layer over layer, all held tiny pockets of air close to the body. Even when damp, wool kept more warmth than linen. Linen was useful near the skin if a family had it, easier to wash and smoother to wear. But wool did the heavy work against cold. A cloak was not just outdoor clothing. It was a walking blanket. A hood protected the neck and ears. Hose kept the legs from bleeding warmth into the air. Mittens worked better than separated fingers because fingers warmed each other. The same rule shaped sleep. A straw mattress lifted the body off the cold floor. Blankets and cloaks piled over people slowed the escape of heat. Wall hangings could cut drafts. Bed curtains, in households rich enough to have them, made a smaller pocket of air around the sleepers. Smaller was safer, so families slept close. Parents, children, servants, sometimes guests, packed into shared beds or shared rooms. Privacy was a luxury. Warmth was a necessity. One person alone in a cold space lost heat quickly. Several bodies under the same coverings became a human furnace. It was uncomfortable. It was crowded. It smelled of wool, breath, smoke, and straw. But it worked. Winter survival depended on accepting what the season demanded. Less movement after dark, more layers, more bodies in less space. The goal was not comfort. The goal was to wake up with fingers that still move. Yet warmth and calories were not the only things a household needed. It also needed time to make fear bearable. Fear had a schedule. In a medieval village, winter was not just counted by weather. It was counted by bells, feast days, fasts, and obligations. The church calendar told people when to stop, when to gather, when to confess, when to celebrate, and when to tighten the belt. Advent came before Christmas, and it was meant to be leaner, a season of waiting, less meat, more restraint. Then Christmas arrived with 12 days of feasting, visiting, singing, and church services. If a household had saved anything special, this was when it appeared: a better loaf, a piece of pork, ale strong enough to remember. Then came Epiphany, saints' days, local festivals, and, later in the season, carnival. These were not decorations on top of peasant life. They organized it. A feast day could mean a pause from labor. A manor feast might put food in the mouths of tenants. A church gathering could bring alms for the poor. A market day spread news about prices, sickness, roads, and rumors of work. Games and songs did not fill a stomach, but they made a dark week less dangerous to the mind. And the calendar also demanded. Rents were due. Tithes had to be paid. Confession prepared the soul. Lent arrived before Easter with fasting rules that made hunger feel religious, not just desperate. That mattered. It did not create food, but it gave suffering a shape people understood. This was the hidden power of the winter calendar. It turned endless cold into chapters. Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Carnival, Lent. Each one carried duties, permissions, and expectations. You knew when help might come. You knew when food should be saved. You knew when the village would gather instead of each family sitting alone with its fear. Feast days did not erase hunger. They redistributed attention. They reinforced bonds. They gave winter a map. But the calendar could not change the hardest part of winter, the moment everyone knew the stores were almost gone. This was the hungry gap. Not the first frost, not the deepest snow. The danger came later, when the body had already spent months on coarse bread, thin ale, beans, peas, and whatever meat had been salted before before winter closed in. By late winter, the household inventory became brutally simple. A sack of grain, a strip of bacon, a few onions softening in the dark, firewood stacked lower than anyone liked, the cow thinner, the children coughing. And this is where medieval survival turns. It was not only a question of having enough, it was a question of needing less. Families stretched food by slowing life down. They slept longer in the dark. They shared heat in crowded rooms. They watered pottage, cut bread thinner, postponed heavy work, and kept animals alive because an animal in spring could become milk, manure, labor, and future food. The villain was uncertainty. One spoiled bin, one fever, one late thaw, one road blocked between village and market. Any of these could break the calculation. So when spring finally came, survival was not announced by warmth first, but by something much smaller. A first nettle pushing through wet soil could mean more than a king's decree. It meant the countdown had changed. Soon there might be shoots near the hedgerow, hens laying again, a cow giving a little more milk, roads softening enough for carts, neighbors, and trade. Not abundance, not yet, but movement. That was what decided whether a family reached spring alive. Not one miracle. It was the whole system holding together for just long enough. Grain kept dry, bread cut smaller before hunger forced it, firewood saved for the nights that mattered, wool patched instead of discarded, animals protected, even when slaughter would have filled the pot for a week, walls stuffed, doors blocked, bodies gathered close. And beyond the door, a village that could lend seed, share labor, watch children, or carry news of a market road opening. Still, luck sat at the table. A mild March could save a household. A rotten beam, a sick ox, a fever in the bed, or rain at the wrong time could undo months of discipline. Medieval peasants did not defeat winter. They survived by living inside its limits, bending work, food, sleep, animals, and hope around the season. So look around your own kitchen, or at the heat coming from your wall, stove, or radiator. Then tell me in the comments, which medieval survival tool would be hardest for you to live without? Stored grain, firewood, wool, livestock, or the village community? Thank you for watching. And the next time you see the first green thing after winter, remember what it once meant, not spring, survival.